I've owned and played with Gansai paints for quite a while, but one thing that's always come up short for me is the complete void of useful information out there on Gansai paints. No one's super clear about what they are or how you use them or anything like that. So that's what I'm going to try and tackle today. Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Madden, and I'm a traditional artist. What are Gansai paints? I'm going to do my best to explain that in this video. Before I get into anything, some disclaimers. I don't speak Japanese, so I do apologize for any mispronunciations or incorrect names. For the sake of simplicity, I will call Western watercolors, watercolors, and Gansai paints for the remainder of this video. Gansai paints are often called Japanese watercolors. I think that this is a dismissive and misleading term, and if that's not reason enough, it's an absolute mouthful. Personally, I don't think that watercolors and Gansai paints should be compared any more than watercolor and gouache or watercolor and ink. They're just both water-based media. But since they are so commonly compared, I will be listing the differences to help clear up any confusion that past comparisons may have caused. I also want to note that finding information on Japanese art supplies is difficult when you don't speak Japanese, so if you do speak Japanese or live in Japan and have more information, I would love to hear it in the comments below. With that all out of the way, what are Gansai paints? Gansai paints are water-based, opaque to semi-opaque paints that are used in a variety of ways. Premixed colors are much more common in Gansai paints than in watercolors. In fact, it's the norm. And while mixing your own colors is definitely possible, it's not the preferred first option. They are traditionally made with an animal hide glue called nikawa, while watercolors are made with a gum binder. The Kuretake brand is vegan, but other vegan brands do exist. It's just that Kuretake is the only one I have experience with, and they are by far the easiest brand to find in the West. Gansai paints reactivate more quickly than most watercolors, and tend to reactivate deeper, for lack of a better word. They quickly become thick and tacky. Because of this, I recommend putting the paint in a palette before use, so that it's more consistent to work with. Gansai paints are traditionally used for quick sketches and for underpaintings for more finished works in more expensive and laborious paints. They are made with cheaper pigments than other traditional Japanese paints, and are made to be much more convenient to use. But they should still be of high quality and reasonably light fast. I have been doing light fastness tests with my Gansai paints, and I will put that clip in here somewhere. So these are all of my Gansai paints swatched, and the left half went into a drawer for the entire time, and the right half went in my window, which gets sun from about mid-morning until basically sunset. So these were out for about 5 months, and while that's not a super long time to do a light fastness test, it was during summer, so the sunniest time of the year, and I think that's well enough to determine whether anything egregious happens. My prediction was that the pinks would be the most fugitive, because pinks are generally quite fugitive, and that the browns would be the most stable. Now, for the most part, these all actually look basically the same, and that is direct sunlight for almost an entire day for 5 months. Now, of course, it's Washington, so some of those days were cloudy, but still, that was plenty of direct sunlight. Now, I will want to point out one thing. All of these are Kuretake, but this and this are Boku-Undo. I'll go over those first because there's less of them. Okay, so this is the Boku-Undo sample, and you can see that the yellow has held up really, really well. I really can't tell a difference. The green is doing pretty good, although it might be faintly lighter. The blue is also holding up really well. The purple is doing okay, but I do think that the red color has faded quite a bit. The red has faded quite a lot, and the brown looks fine. The brown looks basically exactly the same. So my verdict on these is they are beautiful and should probably be used in a sketchbook. Considering how well they have held up, I would say that they would last really, really well in a sketchbook, but or in anything where it's going to be kept in the dark. But for art that's going to be hung on a wall and displayed for a long time, probably not the best idea. These are the other Boku-Undo paints, and these have a lot more color pigment versus black pigment. And the worst offenders are the orange and the purple. Those have definitely faded the most. The blue has held up pretty good. It's still definitely faded a little bit. The green looks like it could have faded a little bit, but I can't really tell. The yellow, again, looks great. The yellow looks totally the same to me. And the pink also looks surprisingly good. There might be some fading. I think there might be a little bit, but I really can't see it, to be honest. So that pink has held up very, very well. So this is the Kuretake Graphite set. And in this set, the red has held up quite well compared to the other one. The yellow looks faintly faded. The green looks a little bit faded. The blue looks a little faded. And the purple definitely looks like some of the red may have faded out of it. The brown, again, looks fine. This is the Kuretake Gansai Art Nouveau set. This gold green looks really good. It may have faded faintly. This is another one where I really just cannot tell. Like, dark yellow ochre also looks quite good. These tan tones look fantastic. This pink did not hold up well. It is very, very pale on this side. A little bit faded on this one. Not too bad, just a little bit. This one is a little faded, but again, I can barely tell. This red has held up amazing. This red looks, I can't be certain, I'm just using my eyes, but it looks completely unchanged to me. This purple also looks really, really good. It may be faintly faded, but it's really 50-50 to me. I really am struggling to tell. Maybe, on camera, maybe a little bit, but in person it's even more subtle. This one did fade, noticeably, but not terribly. It's not great, though. And this one is clearly the most dramatic change. It is just a completely different color. The blues, about the same, about the same, about the same. All the blues, really, the blues and greens on this set have held up incredibly well. This one might be vaguely lighter, but I can barely tell. This one looks really good. These all of these look really, really, really good. And then the browns, and these look untouched to me. These look like maybe that one a little bit, but that could also just be how the paint settled on this side. Like, I really cannot tell. And then the Kuretake main set. Okay, this one is definitely more dramatic on camera than it is in real life. This pink has held up really, really well. This one's held up okay. This one has faded quite a lot. These reds have all held up really well. Oranges, yellows, greens, these look fantastic. These look incredible. And again, blues are looking really, really good. The only one that might be a problem is the indigo here. These two kind of indigo shades might be faded. This one I think is faded. This one may or may not. I can't really tell. These purples look so good. These have held up fantastic. This one, not so much. Oops. This pale lavender has definitely faded a little bit, but considering how pale it is already, it's not that bad. This pink has held up remarkably well, actually. It is slightly faded, but not too bad. And these sort of yellowy flesh tones have held up really, really well. This one looks like some of the pink faded out of it a little bit, but honestly, they're remarkably unchanged. Greens, the greens look amazing. They've really not faded much. This one might have faded a tiny bit, really not faded at all. These two look incredible. That blue also looks incredible. Remarkably well. They've held up remarkably well. And then the browns, which most reliable colors, and these look fantastic. I feel like this gray may have faded, but that could also just be how the pigment settled. It kind of looks like it's in line with how the pigment was dispersing, so I think that one's fine. But yeah, the black has held up really well. All of the browns look fantastic. And then, of course, the golds have held up really, really well. So those look great. Ultimately, I'm pretty impressed. There are really only a few shades that are really notably fugitive, and that's not abnormal for a paint line. Lots of paint lines, professional grade, Western watercolors will have colors that are fugitive because people want them, so they do provide them. The only thing I would really change about these is just actually offer a light fastness rating on the box where you swatch the colors on the inside of the box. That would be amazing, but yeah, I'm very impressed. It's really only a handful of colors. Gansai paints are used as a pre-mixed version of suihi inogu, a paint that is prepared fresh each time one wants to paint with them. Unlike watercolors, where each color is expected to exhibit its own personality and behavior, in Gansai paints each color is expected to behave the same as the next, and the paints are formulated to achieve this end. Since Gansai are essentially premixed and semi-opaque, having white added to some colors is normal and not a sign of poor quality, unlike in watercolors where white is usually a sign of filler. Because Gansai paints are, again, premixed, colors can contain pigments you wouldn't expect, and therefore mixing can be difficult, but they aren't really intended to be mixed all that often. In my experience, different colors can be more reliably achieved through layering, although I haven't had much difficulty with mixing either. Gansai paints are much easier to lift than watercolors, and from what I've seen, lifting is a much more integral part of traditional Japanese painting than it is in the West. They have less flow than watercolors, but various sources have stated that this effect is highly dependent on which papers you use, and that different papers are used for different effects. However, I didn't find a ton of places saying this, so take that with a grain of salt. I'm doing my best. On Western hot press watercolor paper, the paints have little movement, but can bleed into other colors if they are still wet. They tend to push other colors away rather than mixing, and can sometimes push away pigment without another color taking its place, like only the water and not the pigment has bled across the paper. It is much more common in traditional Japanese painting to use very large brushes than it is in watercolor, so the pans are large and flat to accommodate that. They aren't large to give you vast amounts of paint for cheap. Not to say they're stingy, but I think many people misunderstand the purpose of the large pans and get kind of upset when they hit pan really quickly. Describing the difference between Gansai and watercolors and how they layer is difficult, but I am going to give it a go. Layering watercolors is similar to layering sheets of colored glass over each other in front of a window. The colors mix and they get darker, but they still remain luminous, the paper glowing from beneath. Gansai paints are more like layering different colors of chiffon or tissue paper. The colors will mix, but the layers will often reflect the light in their own right, leading to a misty, sort of hazy quality that's very beautiful. They reflect the colors themselves and cover over each other, but you can still tell the difference when yellow is layered over red versus purple or green. The light reflects off of the surface of the paints much more than the paper underneath, although it still does shine through. Gansai paints can dry with a very shiny finish due to their different binder, and this can look quite bad used like watercolors on cheap paper. But used in high quality paper, this effect is both more even and much less pronounced, and it looks a lot better. With Gansai paints, it's much more common to get colors like purples or pastels that are much less common in watercolor sets. This is again because the paints are pre-mixed, and therefore you have colors you would be expected to mix yourself in watercolors. I've seen people praise them for having colors that are rarely seen in watercolors, but in reality, this is just a different kind of paint, and comparing them to watercolors to see which is better just isn't useful. This is an example of the kind of confusion that arises from calling them Japanese watercolors instead of Gansai, a perfectly easy to pronounce word. They aren't comparable because they're completely different paints, made to be used differently. Watercolors are not meant to be mixed with white, and Gansai paints come pre-mixed. End of. Now, this isn't me telling you what to do. I do not care if you do things technically the wrong way. And getting mad about teachers telling you the proper way to use your materials is a waste of everyone's time. I also see a lot of people asking questions like, is it possible to use Gansai paints like watercolors? And the answer is yes. Of course it is. It's a water-based media. You can use acrylics like watercolors if you really want to. They aren't the best paints suited to being used like watercolors. The best paints to use like watercolors is watercolors. That's why we develop the techniques we do, because they work very well with the paints they're designed for. The problem with doing that is that these other paints aren't as suitable for watercolor techniques. And when you try to mimic a technique with a paint that isn't suited for that technique, you'll often be frustrated with the results, and you might even think that you're bad at painting, when in reality, you should really just be using the paints that these techniques were developed for. That being said, if you have questions along these lines, I think you should just try it. Experiment. You will learn so much more quickly than if you just fling the query into the void. Internet strangers cannot tell you if you'll like something, and you might love the weird effects you get using paints the wrong way. I've seen people say that these are the best watercolors for beginners, and I have to say I firmly disagree. If you live in the West, it's incredibly difficult to find any actual information on how to use Gansai paints. And furthermore, Gansai paints are not watercolors. We've been over this. And claiming that they are a great way to learn to paint with watercolors is hugely misleading, because they work differently. The best beginner product for learning a medium is the medium itself. Anything else will teach you a different skill set. In fact, I would suggest that as soon as you realize you enjoy a medium, you try and invest in the highest quality you can, because student-grade products will not behave the same as professional-grade products, and leaning into student-grade products for too long can build some rather bad habits. While I do think it's fair to describe these as Japanese watercolors, I don't think we should call them that, because it's confusing and potentially misleading, especially when there are actual Japanese brands producing Western-style watercolors that often do differ a little bit from Western-style watercolors made in the West. I think we should just call them what they are. They're Gansai, instead of Japanese version of Western thing, which is reductive and feels kind of demeaning. To wrap things up, Gansai paints are a beautiful medium that deserve to be celebrated in their own right, and are a wonderfully approachable entryway to other more intimidating forms of Japanese traditional painting. If you've been curious about them, I do hope you'll give them a try, as I've enjoyed my time with them immensely. There are multiple traditional styles of painting that come from Japan, but finding the information needed to even start researching is very difficult. I know that there is a style of painting called Nihonga, which is water-based, and uses different sized pigment particles to achieve different effects. It is a beautiful style of painting, and anyone interested in learning more about it should check out Kuretakei's art channel, which will be linked below. Their videos are wonderful. The singular source where I found any information that I didn't already know from experience will be linked below. I've been thinking of trying to make this into a series where I explain different mediums, try to clear up misconceptions, and give my own personal advice. If you're interested, please let me know in the comments below. I would even love to touch on the history of the mediums I speak about in future. If you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see me cover next, again, please leave a comment below. I'd love to see what you guys are interested in. I've been talking for so long. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I really hope you enjoyed the painting I was doing in the background of this video. And I really hope that you will like, subscribe, leave a very, very saucy comment in the comment section below. These are all super, super helpful to me. And I really, really hope that I'll see you next time and that you have a fantastic day. Bye!